Alright, y'all, so for dinner today, I am making a version of beef birria. And again, we're using a store-bought product. This is called Tio Pelon's birria adobo. So that's going to be our sauce. But as I was telling you in the past, I like to take store-bought products, doctor them up a little bit, make them my own, and that way I can get so much more flavor and good stuff out of the dish I'm making for the day. So, it does ask to use beef in this recipe, but I believe you could use pork, chicken, lamb, goat, whatever you'd like. But I'm using prime chuck roast here today. So I'm going to get that chuck roast seasoned up a little bit. But before I do that, I just want to pat off some of that moisture. So that way when we do sear this, because we are going to sear it before we get everything else going, it'll get a nice golden sear on there. So I'm going to use a little bit of seasoning salt. Nothing too crazy. I do like Goya adobo seasoned salt. It does add really, really good flavor to the mix. And I'm not going to go crazy with it. I'm just going to get a nice little coating of the seasoning on there. And once I do that, I'm going to use some of that black pepper medley that I like so much. And we don't need a ton of that on there either. Don't forget, when we're doing this, we are going to be searing it, so we don't want to burn all that pepper and garlic salt, seasoned salt. So we're going to get it good and seasoned. Let that sit for just a bit. And while we let that sit, we are going to go ahead and cut up some onions and garlic. Now, the recipe itself doesn't ask for this. But here's where we're able to turn up the flavors a notch. So we're going to add some fresh organic garlic to the mix. And I'm going to use a good amount. I love garlic. I love onions. All that gives really, really good flavor in whatever the dish you're making is. So we're going to get this all peeled up. As you've seen in my other videos, I like to go down about halfway through and then roll that clove. Same thing there. And that way we can get all that skin off there. Sometimes we're lucky and it just comes right off like so. But the remaining part that you want to get off, you don't want any of that pith or connective part of the garlic clove in your meal. It's just going to be tough and it won't cook down enough. If anyone has ever had, onion skins or anything like that get in the mix of their dish, they know that it doesn't break down. All right. So we got our garlic cloves there, and I'm just going to trim those up a bit. Go ahead and trim off the ends just to get all that connective part off. And also, like I said, if you do see any funkiness on there, just cut it off. You're all good. As long as it doesn't go throughout, you're all set. Get the rest of that off there. Again, we got a nice little weird part here that we want to take out. Get that off. All right. So we're going to set this aside for just a minute. I'm going to get all this off my cutting board. I'm also going to use some paper towel here just to brush off all the skin that might be still on there. All right. And as you saw before, this is going to be a really rough chop because basically what this recipe calls for is you take your beef and you sear it in a pot. After you sear it, you add your birria adobo seasoning, or I should say sauce mix. And then you're supposed to add 40 ounces of water. Now that to me too sounds a little different, a little too much for me. I would rather add water as I go. I don't want to add too much to make it soupy. But we're going to go ahead and bust down our garlic here first. Oh, and again, be careful, you don't want to cut yourself. So once we get all the garlic smashed like so, we're just going to do a rough chop here. It'll all cook down in the sauce. This recipe says it does take about 2 to 3 hours of braising in the pot. So it's going to break down all this garlic and onion, so it doesn't have to be super, super chopped up. So now that that's cut up as much as I need it, I'm just going to set it to the side. Go ahead and put it in a bowl here. All right. And I'm going to take my onion. I'm using just a white onion. You could really use whatever kind you would like, except for a red, I believe. Red would probably just kind of leach out a little bit of that color, which it's not going to hurt anything. But if you don't want to change it up too much, just go ahead and peel that off. Spanish onions are a nice choice too. They got really good flavor. I like the intensity of the white onion flavor. It does have, to me, a bit sharper bite to it. But it's not one that lingers like a yellow onion would, in my opinion. So we're just going to, we're going to cut this onion up. We're going to get a nice good, probably about a medium-sized dice there. Again, I like to follow along the onion so we get some nice uniform shape there. And once you get to the end, just be careful, go slowly, but you're able to cut right through. Again, we're just going to set this to the side. So, once we get all this cut up, what we're going to do is we're going to sear our meat first in the pot. Once we sear the meat in the pot, I'm going to take it out, let it rest for just a bit. And then I'm going to add all this onion and garlic. And that's going to go ahead and start helping to take off all that bottom stuff that sticks to the pot from the beef. It'll sweat out these onions, and that way that moisture will start picking up all the drippings in the bottom of that pot. All right. So let's start getting getting our beef searing. I'm gonna get a nice good heat under there because we want a good solid sear. Now I'm using a small pot, non-stick. I do like to use non-stick stuff, but again, sometimes when you're trying to get that sear on there, it doesn't work out great. So cast iron would be an awesome choice. I actually don't have a cast iron pan. I do have a cast iron griddle that I put over my stovetop, but that's going to be too much of a mess for what we're trying to do. So we just get that pot nice and hot. Once we get it hot enough, we're going to go ahead and sear that meat. All right, pan's getting nice and hot. So I'm going to take some clarified butter here. I have it solidified in the fridge. But this is what I'm going to use to sear off my meat as well as the onions and garlic. So I'm just going to put a little tab of the clarified butter in the pan or in the pot. Once I realize that it's all going to melt really well without an issue, then we'll get it nice and evenly coated on the bottom of that pan. And then we are going to start searing the beef. You can also tell kind of when it's nice and hot, your pot's good enough to start searing. That butter will melt down pretty good. Now the beef does have some fat in it as well, so that's going to help get a nice sear on it. But with the tall walls of the pot, you're not going to get a great sear on it when it comes to an all-around sear. That's okay. We're just trying to bring out some of that beef flavor with the caramelization. Okay, so again, chuck roast. We're going to take that, we're going to put it right in our pot. And as you can hear, it's starting to sear a little bit. I'm going to reserve this pan to the side because, again, we're going to pull the beef out. I'll put it back on that pan. Again, it won't be a big deal of cross-contamination because we're not fully cooking the beef. We're just getting a nice sear on it. I'll use that pan to let it rest while I'm cooking my onions and garlic. So as that searing's going on, I want to talk a little bit about how we're making this our recipe versus the recipe that it calls for. I'm going to add a couple different things. I'm going to add some Valentina, not a ton, just a little bit to get that sharp edge from it. I'm also going to add 100% guajillo chili puree. Now that, in my opinion, is one of the best peppers when it comes to flavor for enchiladas, any kind of Mexican food really. But the birria itself is going to have a lot of tomato and peppers in it. But what we're going to do, we're going to jack it up just a touch with some more guajillo paste. It's going to add awesome flavor. But let's go ahead and check our beef, see how that's coming along. Oh yeah, we're getting a nice good sear on it, as you can see there. It's looking really good. Want to get about that kind of a sear on both sides. And again, all you're doing is you're searing to bring out the caramelization in the beef itself, those sugars that are in the blood and things. And that's actually going to add excellent flavor to your dish. Alright, so we got a good sear on our beef there. So I'm going to go ahead and get that pulled out of the pot, but I'm going to turn it down the heat just a little bit. Again, nice, good golden sear there. That's going to give us all that good flavor. Both sides nice and seared. I'm going to take that out, let it rest to the side here for a bit. And as that is resting, let my pan get hot again. I'm going to add a bit more of the clarified butter there to sweat down my onions and garlic. So once that butter melts a little bit, again, because we're using non-stick, I always want to use a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon. That way we're not scratching the pot or pan that I'm using. So butter is nice and melted. We go ahead and add the onion and garlic. And we're going to try to caramelize this a little bit, but more than anything, we're sweating out the flavors of the onion and garlic. So let that go for just a bit, get a good sear on it. So I just want to show you, as we can see, how it's starting to sweat down. Starting to make those onions and garlic a bit translucent. And I did turn up the heat a little bit because I do want to get a little more caramelization on there than I think we're getting. But just let it go for a bit. Again, this is all about flavor. It's not about the component of seeing the chunks of onion or the garlic. In fact, most of that's going to break down in the 2 to 3 hours of cook time that we're going to have with that beef. I'm also considering taking my chuck roast and probably cutting it up into about 4 pieces. That way too, it's going to help render out all the fat. Plus when you go to pull the meat, because you're going to be shredding it up a little bit, it's not going to be all one big connective tissue piece. That's going to be, you know, nice little chunks or nice little, you know, shreds of the beef rather than it being just one big block. It's going to help us when we make our tacos later. Onions and garlic are sweating out nicely. Also getting a little bit of color on there. That's what we're looking for. But we want to keep on going until that onion and garlic is as translucent as we can. Let's give it a stir every so often. And while that is cooking, I'm going to go ahead and cut up the beef like I was saying a little earlier. Go ahead and take this beef here. And again, I'm just going to cut it into 4 pieces. I think that'll be sufficient for what we're trying to do today. Go ahead and put it right back on there. Alright, so that's nice and cut up. Go ahead and get our cutting board out of the way so we can clean it up a little bit. Alright, another little pointer too, anytime you're using a cutting board on a flat surface like so, I always like to put like a towel or paper towel underneath it. That way when you're cutting, things aren't going to slide around. Put a little bit of water, I mean you don't need a lot, but go ahead and take your cutting board, set it right on there. You'll notice you get a much better grip. That way if you're cutting something, you're not going to slip and cut your hand. So let's check in on our onions. Oh yeah, getting really good color there. Looking great. Alright. And once we got some good translucent onions and garlic and we get a little bit of browning on there, that's when I'm going to go ahead and start popping in the rest of my beef again. Kind of nestle it in there. Alright. So as you can see, got our beef in with our onions and garlic nestled in good. And here's where we're going to add our store-bought sauce. Now again, I'm sure this product is great on its own. I do like to... Ooh, that's a tough one. I do like to step it up a notch though. I'm always doing that with my food at home. Not that I don't like other people's recipes, but I just tend to think that I can make the food taste even better. This is a bit of a tough lid to get off, so give me just a bit and we'll pop that right off there, okay? Alright, should be able to get this off now. I just had to tap it around the sides. Oh yeah. Alright, so go ahead and give this a taste. You can kind of adjust your flavors that way. Oh, that tastes real good. So back in the day, my dad he used to have a chorizo company when we lived up in Wisconsin. My dad's born and raised in Texas, down in Gonzales. That whole side of the family is from that area. So as I was a little kid, my dad decided he wanted to try something different in getting a sausage company going. Now, the recipe for my dad's chorizo, unfortunately, was never written down anywhere. But me, as a kid, watching him and my grandmother cook, I just took all of it in. And eventually I was able to become a chef myself. I'm no longer running kitchens. I'm no longer a chef in a professional manner. But I still enjoy cooking. And I still enjoy making great food even better. So, the reason I brought up my dad and his chorizos is because every so often you get a hint of the flavors that used to go into his chorizo. Now, this birria adobo, as well as a Valentina, it's going to be a nice combo of those type of flavors that he used to use. Now, they started off by taking the sausage themselves, having them made, and then injecting them with the seasoning and flavor. Eventually, they had a company called Clements that was actually producing them for him. So that way he wasn't having to spend the time injecting all the sausages and doing it that way. But it really had kind of a combination of like a bratwurst / chorizo mix. It was meant to eat kind of like a bratwurst in a tortilla. Grandma used to make homemade tortillas that were nice and thick, borderline pita-like. So you'd take those chorizos after grilling them up or frying them up, place them right in that tortilla, a little bit of cheese. My dad would also make like a pepper and onion red sauce that would go right on top. And for a while there, we were selling them at, like county fair and stuff like that, until he got the sausage company Clements to start making them, and then they were on the shelves in the store. It's something I've been looking to possibly recreate at some point. My dad's gone now, but nice to be carrying on his legacy a little bit with the chorizo. So, we're going to do our next step here. Now that the beef and onions are nice and cooked, getting good sear on them, we're going to add our adobo sauce. Just pour it right over the top. Make sure we get all that liquid out of there. And then I'm going to take the Valentina. I'm just going to do a couple little drops of that. You don't need a ton. And then, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, we got our guajillo chili paste. And I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of this package in there. It's going to add really, really good flavor. And you can find this at most like Mexican style grocery stores. But again, don't be wasteful. Get it all out of there. Once all that is in the mix, I'm going to take my tongs and let that sauce roll right underneath the beef there. And again, like I was saying earlier, the recipe itself calls for 40 ounces of water to help it braise. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add about a quart, which is 32 ounces. And then we'll go from there if I need to add any more. Again, most of the time recipes, I don't know. I follow them. They don't turn out as good as I would like. That's when I start to think about it, how I can tweak that recipe a little bit. So as you can see, when I'm making things, that's kind of what I do. I just go down the line, see what works best for me. And if I do need to add a little more water later, it's not a big deal. But again, we're adding a quart, which is 32 ounces. And even that, in my opinion, might be a bit much water. But next step here, we're going to go ahead and make sure it's mixed through. All right. Now, next step, we're going to let this simmer for about 2 or 3 hours. I'm going to put it on the lowest heat possible. But once I bring this back up to like a simmer, I'm going to put it on that back burner. And I'm not going to close the lid completely tight because we want to cook off some of that water. I'm going to leave it on its side like so. And that way, as it's simmering, it'll let that water or steam release out of the pot. Because basically what you're doing is, again, it's a pot braised beef. And again, we want to check it for water. We don't want to burn on the bottom. But I think that's plenty of water. I think it's going to be just fine. But we do want to let it be able to be released. We don't want to trap it in that pot. So again, once we get a nice little simmer on here, we'll kind of put that lid on half cocked, and we'll put it on that back burner and let it roll for about 2 or 3 hours. We're going to check it, I would say, after about 2 hours and see how it's doing. Again, you want that beef to be able to shred right apart for our tacos. Now, classically, birria tacos, I'm using some corn tortillas. I do like to use lower calorie stuff, lower carb stuff. A lot of people say corn, you know, it's got a lot of carbs in it. But like, for instance, these tortillas here, they're little street taco size. And it says 90 calories for 4 tortillas. Carbohydrates, it's going to be 19, but it does have 2 grams of fiber. So if you know how the carb thing works, just subtract that, the 2 grams of fiber from the carbs. It's actually giving you about 17 grams. Now for me, being on the diet I try to stay as keto as possible, which means I'm trying to eat 50 grams of carbs or less a day. It keeps me healthy, keeps my blood pressure down, also keeps my blood sugar in check. Not that I have issues with those, but the older I'm getting, the less I want to worry about it. So now it's searing up nice and good. Simmering a little bit there. And that's about the stage we want it, so we're going to pop it to the back burner there. I'm going to shut off the front burner. Get it back there. And I want to crank it up to about a medium heat on that back burner. If I come in and it starts looking like it's, you know, rolling too hard or it's boiling off too much of that water, I'll just turn it down just a little bit. And again, checking it every so often to add water as needed. Just wanted to commence this part of the video as our first step. Now, being that it has to roll for that much time, I'm going to go ahead and step away from it for a while. But once we get to the point where it starts shredding up and stuff, I'll start, you know, videoing that as well. And then I can talk you through the different things I'm going to do with a store-bought rice that we really like. It's really, really good Mexican rice. I do like to doctor it up just a little bit with some of our adobo seasoning salt, a little water. I also like to use corn oil. Now, I'm not a seed oil guy at all, but sometimes you do need certain oils for certain flavors. You could use olive oil, but it's not really going to give it the flavor you want. So I'm going to use a touch of corn oil, and that's going to give it the flavor that we need for our dish.